People who grew up in the 1970s carry a psychology that feels almost impossible to explain to anyone born after the 2000s. It's not nostalgia. It's not romanticizing the past. It's a completely different mental operating system, one built in a world that doesn't exist anymore. They grew up in an era shaped by silence, freedom, danger, and a version of childhood that would get almost every parent reported today. No helmets, no seatbelts, no instant communication, no share your location. It was a generation raised by instinct, not instructions. They lived in neighborhoods where kids disappeared for hours and nobody panicked. You didn't have a phone. You didn't have GPS. You had a bike, a couple of friends, scraped knees, and one rule: be home before dark. And even that rule depended on your mother's mood. Psychologically, this level of freedom did something rare. It created children who didn't need constant reassurance to feel safe. It built a sense of internal navigation, a belief that even if things go wrong, you can probably figure it out. That inner voice, "I'll figure it out," still lives inside them today. It shows up when they solve problems quietly, when they don't wait for instructions, when they don't collapse at the first sign of uncertainty. But if you really want to understand the psychology of the 1970s generation, you have to look at the people who raised them. Most of them were raised by parents who survived World War II, or were born in its immediate aftermath. Imagine growing up with a father or mother who had seen real fear, real hunger, real loss, and real sacrifice, not as stories, but as lived experience. Those parents didn't talk much. They didn't explain their emotions. They didn't express softness easily. They didn't ask children how they felt. They worked. They endured. They carried the weight of life in silence. And without meaning to, they passed that survival psychology to their kids. Not through lectures, not through conversations, but through the way they lived. Children from the 70s watched strength not as a quote on social media, but as a daily act. They learned responsibility not from chore charts, but from real necessity. If something broke, you fixed it. If something scared you, you handled it. If something hurt you, you kept moving. They didn't grow up learning that someone will always come help them. They grew up learning that they are the help. This is why people from the 1970s matured earlier. Responsibility wasn't something they learned in a classroom or from a motivational video. It was something they inhaled at home. It was woven into daily life. You helped with things. You fixed things. You figured things out. If something broke, you didn't replace it. You repaired it. If something went wrong, you didn't panic. You adapted. The world they grew up in didn't allow fragility. You learned to ride a bike by falling, not by being wrapped in protective gear. You learned street smarts by getting lost, not by turning on a GPS. You learned emotional control by watching adults who never said how they felt, yet carried on anyway. They didn't have the luxury of assuming someone else would step in. There was no helicopter parenting, no Google, no tutorials, just trial, error, bruises, and a strange kind of independence that modern life rarely allows. And here's the part most people forget. The environment of the 70s forced them to develop a backbone, a kind of quiet stability you rarely see today. They saw their parents work long hours without complaining. They saw neighbors support each other without posting about it. They saw adults handle real-life problems without panic, without drama, without an audience. Psychologically, witnessing this creates something powerful. A belief that problems are normal. A belief that responsibility isn't a punishment. A belief that life is serious, but survivable. People raised in the 70s learned to be dependable because they didn't have a choice. Dependability wasn't a virtue, it was a requirement of their environment. And that's why even today, Many of them feel older than their age, not physically, but mentally. Their maturity didn't come from books. It came from watching life unfold in its rawest form, unfiltered, unscripted, and very, very real. There's something almost poetic about this generation. They are the bridge between two worlds, the slow, grounded, analog past and the fast, loud, overstimulated digital age. They carry a memory of a world where nothing was instant and everything required patience. They also stand in a world now obsessed with urgency, speed, and efficiency. They've lived in both timelines. They understand both realities, and that gives them a perspective that younger generations often find difficult to grasp.
Now look at the generation born after the 2000s, a generation raised in a completely different psychological environment, one that the 1970s could never have imagined. They grew up with phones in their hands before they even learned how to talk properly. Notifications, videos, messages, timelines, an endless stream of stimulation, all competing for their attention.
Their brains have been running at full speed since childhood, and you can see the effect everywhere. They get tired faster, they get overwhelmed more easily, their attention disappears in seconds. Not because they're weak, but because their nervous system was never designed for this much input. While children of the 70s wandered outside until the streetlights came on, today's children wander inside their screens, scrolling, tapping, refreshing, consuming more information in a single day than a 70s kid saw in an entire week. Social media gives them connection, but it also gives them pressure. It tells them who they should be, how they should look, what they should achieve, and how far behind they already are. Comparison doesn't happen once in a while. It happens automatically, passively, constantly. And here's the heartbreaking part. They feel behind even when they're doing fine. They feel inadequate even when nothing is wrong. There was no helicopter parenting, no Google, no tutorials, just trial, error, bruises, and a strange kind of independence that modern life rarely allows. And here's the part most people forget. The environment of the 70s forced them to develop a backbone, a kind of quiet stability you rarely see today. They saw their parents work long hours without complaining. They saw neighbors support each other without posting about it. They saw adults handle real-life problems without panic, without drama, without an audience. They feel tired even when they've barely started their day, because their brain never truly rests. The phone never stops calling for attention. Even in moments meant to be relaxing, they're scrolling, and scrolling is not rest. Scrolling is stimulation disguised as leisure. They're smart, they're creative, they're open-minded in ways older generations admire. But they're also mentally drained, overstimulated, and emotionally overloaded in ways older generations never had to experience. The world they're growing up in moves too fast for the human brain, and all they can do is try to keep up, one notification at a time. Meanwhile, the 70s generation looks at them with confusion and concern. Why are they so anxious? Why can't they focus? Why do they need validation all the time? But the truth is simple. This isn't weakness. It's adaptation. They're not fragile. They're overwhelmed. They're not irresponsible. They're overstimulated. They're not detached. They're drowning in input. Two generations shaped by two completely different worlds, one by silence, the other by noise. Maybe that's why talking to someone from the 70s feels different. They're grounded. They're present. They're not trying to impress you. They're not competing in some silent scoreboard inside their mind. Not physical, not financial, but mental. A constant noise, a constant comparison, a constant feeling of not being enough, even when they are. And when you put these two worlds side by side, something becomes clear. Strength doesn't come from being taught. Strength comes from being tested.
Their confidence doesn't come from quotes or influencers. It comes from surviving a world that required real resilience. It comes from responsibilities they carried long before they understood the word responsibility. Meanwhile, the newer generation carries a different kind of weight.
The real question is, which world would you rather be shaped by? The world of danger or the world of distraction? Because both leave scars. Both create strengths. Both produce adults who carry the fingerprints of their childhood. People from the 70s feel older than their age because they lived in a world that demanded maturity early.
People from the 2000s feel younger than their age because they live in a world that delays maturity endlessly. Two generations, two different battles. Neither one simple, neither one fair. Now I want to ask you, which generation do you think had it harder, and why? Are you from before 1980 or after it? And how do you think the world you grew up in shaped who you are today? If this video made you think differently, hit subscribe. We go deeper every day.
Don't forget to like the video. Your support helps this message reach more people. And if you want to connect with others who think like you, join our community. Because Reverse Hub isn't just a channel, it's a mindset.